Hira covered her mouth. "It's showing us something," she whispered. The voice returned, louder this time, echoing from all directions. "Those who seek what was lost must face what they have hidden." The sound sent shivers down their spines. Bilal dropped his flashlight, and it rolled across the floor, stopping near the stone table. The light shone upward, revealing carvings on the table's surface. 4 names. Their names: Arman, Zoya, Bilal, Hira. Zoya's voice broke as she whispered, "How does it know who we are?" The ground beneath them trembled slightly, and dust fell from the ceiling. Arman grabbed Zoya's hand. "Stay close," he said. They backed away from the table slowly, but the whispering grew louder, like dozens of unseen voices speaking at once. The light flickered again, and for a split second, they saw something moving in the shadows near the far wall. A dark shape, tall and thin, standing perfectly still. "Did you see that?" Hira whispered. No one answered. The shadow moved again, gliding silently along the wall, its outline flickering like smoke. The friends huddled together, their flashlights shaking. The voice filled the chamber once more, deep and cold. "You have entered the place of truth. The past remembers your steps." Then everything went silent again. The glowing light faded until only the faint beam of their flashlights remained. Arman took a deep breath. "We keep moving," he said. "There has to be another way out." They walked slowly toward a narrow tunnel that led out of the chamber. The sound of their footsteps echoed softly. None of them spoke now. Every few seconds, one of them would turn back, certain that something or someone was following them. As they stepped into the tunnel, a strange thing happened. The walls began to reflect faint images, almost like mirrors. But what they saw in those reflections made their blood run cold. It wasn't their reflections. It was them, but older, darker, and crying. Zoya froze. That's me," she whispered. "But why am I crying?" No one could answer. The reflections watched them move, their eyes full of sadness. The tomb was no longer just a place. It was alive, and it knew who they were. The tunnel stretched ahead, narrow and endless, as if it had no beginning and no end. The faint light from their flashlights barely touched the walls, which shimmered with a strange glass-like surface. Every few steps, the friends caught glimpses of movement, not in front of them, but beside them. When they turned, they saw their reflections again, faintly glowing in the polished stone. But something was wrong. The reflections didn't move at the same time they did. They were slower, delayed, and sometimes they moved when the friends stood perfectly still. Zoya gripped Hira's arm tightly. "These reflections, they're not us," she whispered, her voice trembling. Arman tried to stay calm. "Don't look at them. Just keep walking," he said firmly, though his hands were shaking. The tunnel grew colder with each step, the air so thick it was hard to breathe. Their footsteps echoed unnaturally, as if more than 4 people were walking. After several minutes, the tunnel opened into a wide chamber. The floor was smooth and shiny, like black glass. Dozens of mirrors stood around the room, tall, broken, cracked, some covered with dust. A faint light came from above, though none of them could see the source. It felt like stepping into a nightmare that had been waiting for them. Bilal lifted his flashlight toward one of the mirrors and froze. "Guys, look," he whispered. The others followed his gaze. In the mirror stood Bilal himself, but the reflection wasn't moving. It stared back at him with lifeless eyes, his expression cold and emotionless. Then, slowly, the reflection smiled, a twisted, painful smile that Bilal hadn't made. He stumbled backward, his voice breaking. "That's not me. It's not," Zoya gasped as she turned to another mirror. She saw herself, but not as she was now. In the reflection, she was kneeling beside someone, crying. Her hands were covered in something dark. Blood. She took a shaky step closer. "No. This isn't real," she said, her lips trembling. But as she reached out to touch the glass, her reflection whispered her name. Zoya. The whisper was faint, almost gentle, but it froze her in place. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, stepping back. Arman rushed to her side, pulling her away. "Don't touch anything," he said. "These mirrors, they're showing us something." Hira turned slowly, her flashlight sweeping across the mirrors. Each one now showed a different image, scenes from their lives. Armin saw himself lying to his parents, sneaking money from his father's wallet when he was young. The image made his stomach twist. He'd buried that memory long ago. Bilal saw himself arguing with a friend, shouting angry words, then turning away and leaving him alone. That friend had died in an accident the next day. The guilt returned like a punch to the chest. Hira's hands shook as she saw her own reflection. She was standing beside an old woman from the village, one she had ignored when the woman begged for help. The reflection looked at her with sad, disappointed eyes. "I didn't mean to," Hira whispered softly, tears filling her eyes. Zoya fell to her knees. Her reflection showed her yelling at her younger sister, saying things she didn't mean. She remembered that day clearly. It was the last time she had spoken to her before her sister ran away and never came back. The friends stood frozen, surrounded by the echoes of their past. Each mirror seemed to know their deepest regrets, their hidden mistakes, the things they never confessed to anyone. Then, from the far end of the hall, the same deep, hollow voice spoke again. Truth reflects in the eyes that fear it. The mirrors began to vibrate, the glass trembling as cracks formed across their surfaces. The reflection screamed silently, faces twisting in pain. The sound grew louder, a high, echoing hum that filled the room. Arman shouted, "We have to get out of here!" He grabbed Zoya's hand and they began running toward the exit. But as they moved, the mirrors started shattering one by one, their broken shards floating in the air like glittering knives. Each piece reflected their faces, distorted and crying. Bilal ducked as a shard flew past his head, slicing his arm. He winced in pain but kept running. The shards didn't fall. They circled around them, as if alive. "Your truth cannot be escaped," the voice thundered again. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook, and the mirrors melted into the walls, turning the whole chamber into one giant reflection. They could see themselves from every angle, terrified, desperate, guilty. Zoya screamed, covering her face. "Make it stop!" The reflection of Armin stepped forward from inside the mirror. It looked exactly like him, but its eyes were black, hollow. "You can't run from what you've done," it said in a voice that was his own. Armin stumbled backward, his heart pounding. "You're not real," he shouted. The reflection smiled. "Neither is your innocence." One by one, the reflections of Zoya, Bilal, and Hira began stepping out too, their faces twisted with pain. The real friends huddled together in the center of the room, shaking. The reflected versions surrounded them, whispering words they couldn't understand. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the reflection stopped moving. The light flickered once, twice, and then everything went dark. The next moment, the lights from their flashlights blinked back on, and the mirrors were gone. The room was empty again. The only sound was their breathing and the faint hum that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Zoya wiped her tears. What was that place?" she asked weakly. Armin didn't answer. He looked at his reflection in the small metal flashlight, his real reflection, and for a moment he could still see that dark version of himself staring back. They all knew one thing now. The tomb wasn't just testing their courage, it was showing them the truth they tried to bury, and the deeper they went, the more their past would follow them. The four friends stood in silence, their hearts beating fast. The air in the tomb was colder than before, and the light from their flashlights felt weaker, as if the darkness itself was swallowing it. No one spoke for a long time. The mirrors were gone, but the fear they had seen in them was still fresh in their minds. Zoya's eyes were red from crying. "I can't take this anymore," she whispered. "This place is alive. It knows everything about us." Arman tried to stay calm, but even his voice shook. "We'll find the way out," he said. "There has to be another tunnel." He turned, looking for a passage, and noticed a faint glow coming from the far wall. It was small, just a thin line of light, but it flickered like fire. "Over there," he said, pointing. They began walking slowly toward it, their footsteps echoing in the empty silence. As they moved closer, the glow grew brighter, and the sound of faint chanting reached their ears. It was soft at first, then stronger, a deep, rhythmic sound that seemed to come from below the ground. Hira stopped walking. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Bilal nodded slowly. "It sounds like people praying." They reached a small archway carved into the wall. Strange markings covered it, glowing faintly gold. The light from within flickered like a flame. Arman hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside first. The others followed, staying close together. The passage was narrow and curved downward like a spiral. The chanting grew louder as they descended. Finally, they reached a vast hall. The walls here were covered with carvings of hundreds of people kneeling, their faces carved in fear. Torches burned in tall stone holders, though no one was there to light them. In the center of the hall stood a raised platform, and on it a figure cloaked in white, standing completely still. Armin opened his eyes slowly, breathing hard. The world around him had changed. The Grand Hall and the Keeper were gone. He stood alone in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were made of cracked stone, and the air smelled of dust and smoke. A single torch flickered on the wall, casting long, trembling shadows. His voice echoed weakly when he spoke. "Hello? Zoya? Bilal? Hira?" No one answered. His chest tightened. He was completely alone. A voice broke the silence. "Armin, do you remember what you took?" He spun around, holding his flashlight like a weapon. "Who's there?" he shouted. The voice came again, calm but sharp, echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "You stole what was not yours. You lied to protect your pride. Now you will live the truth you denied." The flame flickered, and suddenly the room shifted. The walls faded into mist, and Armin found himself standing in his old home. He recognized every detail: the wooden table, the cracked window, the faint smell of his mother's cooking. For a moment, relief washed over him. "It's just a dream," he whispered. But then he saw something that made his heart freeze. At the table sat his father, looking tired and disappointed, holding an open wallet. His younger self, just a boy, stood before him shaking. Armin remembered this moment. He had stolen money from his father years ago to impress his friends. He had denied it, blamed someone else, and never confessed. The voice whispered softly, "Watch what your lies created." His father spoke, his voice heavy with sadness. "I never thought my son would steal from me." The boy said nothing. Armin remembered how he had looked away, ashamed but too proud to admit the truth. His father's eyes filled with quiet disappointment, the kind that hurt more than anger. The memory faded, and Armin fell to his knees, covering his face. "I was young. I was stupid," he cried. "I didn't mean to hurt him." The whisper returned, colder this time. "Yet you never sought forgiveness?" "Pride grows where truth dies." Armin's tears fell to the ground. The torchlight dimmed. "Please," he whispered, "give me a chance to make it right." The voice was silent for a moment, then said softly, "Redemption begins when truth is spoken." A blinding light filled the room, and Armin disappeared. Bilal opened his eyes to darkness. The sound of dripping water echoed in the distance. He was standing in a damp cave, the walls wet and cold. His flashlight flickered weakly. "Armin?" he called out, but his voice only bounced back at him. He turned in circles, panic rising in his chest. Then he saw something ahead, a dim glow like a lantern in the fog. He moved closer, his footsteps splashing in shallow water. As he approached, he saw two figures sitting on the ground. One of them was himself, a younger version, laughing. The other was his best friend, Faisal. They were both arguing, their voices rising. Bilal remembered this, his last fight with Faisal before the accident. "Don't bring me into your mess again," his younger self shouted. "I'm done with you!" He had walked away that day, leaving Faisal behind, angry and alone. Now the older Bilal watched helplessly as the scene played out again. Faisal's voice echoed softly. "You left me, Bilal. I needed you, but you chose yourself." The ghostly image turned to face him. Faisal's eyes were full of sadness. "You blamed yourself all these years, but never spoke my name again." Bilal fell to his knees, his hands trembling. "I was scared. I didn't know how to face your family. I thought forgetting would make it easier." The voice of the Keeper filled the cave. "Regret is not redemption. You cannot escape what your heart refuses to face." The water around Bilal began to rise, covering his legs. "Please," he shouted. "I'm sorry. I should have been there." The water stopped, and the light around him faded. The whisper came again, soft but clear. "Then speak his name, and carry no more lies." Bilal closed his eyes and whispered, "Forgive me, Faisal." The cave glowed faintly, then vanished. Hira awoke in a quiet street. The sky was gray, and the sound of rain filled the air. She recognized the place. It was the same street from her village, the one where an old woman used to beg for help every morning. Hira had always avoided her, pretending not to hear her cries. She saw herself walking past the old woman again, eyes down, pretending to be in a hurry. The old woman's voice echoed faintly. Kindness is a choice, child. Silence is too. Hira began to cry. I was afraid, she whispered. I didn't know how to help. The woman turned to her, eyes filled with calm sorrow. A single act of care could have changed everything. But now you understand the cost of silence. The rain fell harder, washing away the scene until only darkness remained. Hira covered her face, whispering, I will never ignore someone in pain again. I promise. A soft glow appeared around her, warm and gentle. Zoya found herself standing in her childhood home in front of a mirror. Behind her, she heard a familiar voice, her sister's. You never came after me, the voice said softly. Zoya turned, tears already falling. Her sister stood there just as she remembered, young, angry, and heartbroken. Zoya reached out. I tried to find you, I did. I just didn't know how. Her sister shook her head. You said words that cut deep. You never said sorry, Zoya sobbed. I was stubborn. I was wrong. Please forgive me. The mirror began to glow, showing both sisters standing together, holding hands. The reflection smiled gently. Forgiveness begins when love speaks louder than pride. The light surrounded Zoya, wrapping her in warmth, and the vision faded away. When the four friends opened their eyes again, they were back in the great hall. The torches burned softly. The keeper stood before them, silent and still. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. Their faces were wet with tears, but there was peace in their eyes. The keeper raised one hand. You have faced your past. Your hearts have spoken. The tomb has seen your truth. The firelight flickered, and the hall began to shake. The carvings on the walls started to fade, one by one, until the stone was bare. The final judgment awaits, the keeper said. And as the ground beneath them began to glow, the friends realized their journey was not over. They had faced their regrets, but now they had to face their verdict. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and a golden light spread across the ancient floor like liquid fire. The walls of the great hall cracked open, revealing streams of white energy swirling through the air. The friends stood close together, their hearts pounding. None of them spoke. They could only stare as the keeper raised his hand and the light gathered around him like a storm obeying his will. You have faced your truths, the keeper said, his voice echoing like thunder and wind. But truth alone does not free a soul. Every choice has a cost, and every sin leaves a shadow. Now you shall know your verdict. The light grew brighter until it hurt to look. Armin shielded his eyes. Zoya grabbed Hira's hand. Bilal whispered, Whatever happens, we stay together. But as soon as he spoke, the light split the air, and each of them was pulled apart by invisible force, separated into their own circles of glowing light. Arman screamed for his friends, but his voice vanished into the air. He stood alone once again, surrounded by blinding white mist. Slowly shapes began to form before him, the faces of people he had wronged, disappointed, and betrayed. His father stood at the front, silent but calm. You hurt others to protect your pride, the voice of the keeper echoed. Do you still believe you were right? Arman fell to his knees. No, he said softly. I only believed in myself, not the truth. I see that now. The image of his father smiled faintly, then disappeared into light. The keeper's voice returned. The tomb does not punish those who repent. It only reflects their hearts. A beam of light wrapped around Armin. It felt warm, peaceful, forgiving. For the first time, he didn't feel afraid. Bilal stood in darkness again. A single light shone from above, forming a circle around him. The water that had surrounded him before returned, but this time it was calm and clear. His reflection looked up at him, smiling gently, Faisal's face appearing beside it. Bilal spoke softly. I forgive myself, and I will live the way you would have wanted, honest. Loyal, kind, the reflection faded, and the calm water began to glow, lifting him into the light. Redemption is not in forgetting, the keeper's voice said. It is in remembering and choosing differently. Bilal closed his eyes as the light carried him upward. Hira stood in a garden, green, bright, full of flowers. The sound of the wind chimes filled the air. The old woman from before stood before her, smiling kindly this time. Child, she said softly, you finally listened to the silence. Hira bowed her head, tears in her eyes. I promise I will never close my heart again. I will help, I will care. The woman placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. then your soul is free. The garden light grew stronger, wrapping Hira in a golden glow. Zoya found herself standing in front of a river. Her sister was on the other side, smiling through the mist. Zoya reached out her hand, but this time the distance didn't matter. The river began to glow, forming a bridge of light between them. Her sister spoke softly. "You've carried guilt for too long. Let love guide you now." Zoya crossed the bridge and embraced her sister. A calm wind swept across the river, and both of them faded into radiant light. The night was silent except for the soft whistle of the desert wind. In a small forgotten village near the edge of the endless sands, 4 friends, Arman, Zoya, Bilal, and Hira, sat around a dim fire outside Arman's house. The flame flickered gently, throwing shadows on their young, curious faces. They had grown up hearing stories about a mysterious tomb far out in the desert, a place people called the Tomb of the Lost. It was said that anyone who dared to go inside never returned. Most thought it was only a story to keep children away from danger. But that night, something in the air felt different. Maybe it was boredom, or maybe destiny, but Arman suddenly said, "What if we go there? Just once, to see if it's real." Zoya's eyes widened. "Are you crazy? You know what people say about that place." Bilal smirked, trying to hide his nervousness. "Come on, Zoya, you really believe those old stories?" "There's no such thing as curses." Hira stayed quiet, staring into the fire. "But what if there's truth in them?" she whispered. Her voice trembled slightly. Arman stood up, brushing the sand from his clothes. "We'll go together. Just a look. We'll be back before sunrise." His tone carried both excitement and pride. The others exchanged uneasy glances, but in the end, curiosity won over fear. They gathered flashlights, a bottle of water, and a small bag of food. The night grew darker as they began their walk toward the unknown. The desert stretched endlessly under the moonlight. The air was dry, and the sound of their footsteps was the only noise that broke the silence. As they moved farther from the village, the sky turned a deeper shade of black, swallowing the stars one by one. Zoya kept close to Hira, while Bilal walked ahead, pretending to be brave. Arman led the way, following the faint shape of an old stone structure that began to appear in the distance. After nearly an hour of walking, they stopped. In front of them stood a massive stone tomb, half buried in sand. Its walls were cracked and covered with ancient symbols no one could read. The air felt strangely cold, even though the desert night was supposed to be warm. A strange energy seemed to pulse from the ground beneath their feet. Zoya rubbed her arms. "Do you feel that?" she asked softly. Bilal laughed nervously. "Probably just the wind." But deep down, even he didn't believe that. The 4 of them stood there, staring at the entrance. The doorway was tall and narrow, blocked by a huge stone slab. Arman stepped closer, running his hand over the strange carvings. "These marks, they look like warnings," he said quietly. Hira whispered, "Maybe we shouldn't go inside." Her voice was small, almost lost to the wind. Then, without warning, the wind changed direction. It grew colder, sharper. The sand began to swirl around them in small circles. The firelight from their flashlights flickered. Suddenly a soft sound echoed, like a low breath or perhaps a whisper. It was so faint they couldn't tell if it came from the tomb or the wind itself. Zoya's hand shook as she pointed at the stone door. "Did that just move?" she said, her voice breaking. The others turned to look. The stone slab had begun to shift slightly, scraping against the sand. It was impossible. It looked too heavy for any person to move. Bilal stepped back, his eyes wide. "No way! No one's here!" The slab moved again, slower this time, until a narrow gap appeared. From that gap came a faint golden light, glowing like fire underwater. A rush of cold air poured out, brushing against their faces. It smelled of dust, old earth, and something else, something they couldn't name. Arman felt a chill crawl up his spine. "It's opening by itself," he whispered. The gap widened until they could see inside. The walls shimmered faintly, covered with ancient drawings that seemed to move when the light hit them. Hira clutched Zoya's arm. "We should go back," she said quickly. But Arman stepped forward. "No, we've come this far. Let's just see what's inside." He took the first step. The moment his foot crossed the entrance, the light around them grew brighter for a moment, then dimmed again. Zoya followed, her heart pounding. Bilal and Hira exchanged one last look, then stepped in too. Inside, the air was thick and silent. Their footsteps echoed against the stone floor. The walls were covered with strange symbols that glowed softly in the dark. The deeper they went, the colder it became. Zoya shivered. It feels like this place is alive, she whispered. Bilal turned his flashlight toward the carvings. Maybe it's some kind of reflection, he said, though he didn't sound convinced. Suddenly, a faint whisper filled the space. It was so soft they almost thought they imagined it. Then it came again, clearer this time. It sounded like a voice calling each of their names, one by one. Armand. Zoya. Bilal. Hira! The four froze. The light from their flashlights flickered again, and for a moment the walls seemed to pulse with the sound. Hira's breathing quickened. Who's there? She called out, her voice echoing into the dark. No answer came, only the same whisper repeating their names, now from somewhere deeper inside the tomb. Armand tried to stay calm. It's just the wind, he said, though his voice trembled. But in his heart, he knew it wasn't. There was no wind down here. No movement. Just the heavy silence of a place that had been waiting for centuries. They all turned back toward the entrance, just to make sure it was still open. But as their flashlights hit the doorway, the unthinkable happened. The stone slab began to move again, sliding back into place with a deep, grinding sound. Zoya screamed and ran toward it, but before she could reach, it slammed shut with a final thud that shook the ground beneath them. The echo rang through the tomb, long and hollow. Now there was no way out. The light on the walls flickered one last time, then steadied. A strange humming sound filled the air. Armand took a slow breath. We're not alone in here, he said softly. And deep inside the tomb, something moved. The silence after the door closed was heavy, so heavy that even their breathing sounded loud. The air inside the tomb had changed. It was colder now, and the smell of old dust and stone filled their lungs. Zoya pressed her hand against the door, pushing with all her strength, but it didn't move an inch. It's locked. It won't open, she cried out, her voice shaking. Bilal joined her, trying to push, but the stone didn't even make a sound. It was as if it had become part of the wall itself. Armand looked around, his flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. There has to be another way out, he said, though his voice didn't sound sure. The beam of his light swept across the walls, revealing more carvings, figures of people kneeling, hands raised toward the sky, their faces carved in terror. Hira slowly traced one of the carvings with her fingers. The stone was cold, yet it almost felt alive. These people, they looked like they were begging, she whispered. Suddenly, the air shifted. A low whisper brushed past their ears. It wasn't just a sound, it felt like the whisper moved through them. Armand spun around, his flashlight jerking from one corner to another. Did you hear that? He asked. No one answered. They were all frozen. The whisper came again, this time clearer, softer, almost human. Your deeds are known. Zoya gasped, her flashlight shaking in her hand. Who said that? She cried, her voice echoing across the walls. The whisper came again, this time from the opposite direction. Your truth will face the light. Hira grabbed Zoya's arm tightly. Bilal's face turned pale. It's coming from everywhere, he said, stepping closer to the group. The sound wasn't loud, it was calm, slow, and cold, like a voice carried from far away. Armand tried to sound brave. Maybe it's the wind passing through tunnels, he said, but even he didn't believe his own words. There was no wind in this sealed place, only still, heavy air. The friends began walking deeper inside. The walls seemed to glow faintly with each step, as if reacting to their movement. Strange symbols started to appear on the floor. Circles, eyes, and shapes they didn't recognize. The further they went, the more uneasy they felt. After a few meters, they entered a large chamber. It was wide and round, with a tall ceiling that disappeared into darkness. In the center of the room stood something that looked like a stone table. Around it were broken statues and crumbled pieces of rock. The light from their flashlights bounced off the walls, and for a moment, everything was silent again. Then Zoya's flashlight caught something on the ground. Footprints. Human footprints covered in dust, but fresh enough to be seen clearly. Someone was here before us, she whispered. Bilal shook his head. That's impossible. No one's been here for centuries. But there they were, 4 sets of footprints leading toward the table in the center. As they moved closer, Hira noticed something strange. The footprints were exactly the same size as theirs. She stopped walking, her heart racing. Armin, she said quietly, look at this. There are footprints, Armin frowned. No, that can't be. But when he shined the light closer, he saw it too. Each print perfectly matched their shoes. A chill ran through all of them. Zoya took a step back. How can this be? We just got here, she said, her voice trembling. Armin looked at the table. Maybe it's just a coincidence, he said, but he could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Suddenly the walls started to hum softly. The glowing symbols brightened, spreading across the stones like veins of fire. The friends stared around, eyes wide with fear. From the glowing walls came faint images. Figures moving, people kneeling, crying, reaching for something above them. The images looked alive.